You see, in the world of power, real strength isn't always measured in the number of tanks you roll out or the noise your guns can make. Sometimes it's about one move, calculated, quiet, deliberate, that shifts the entire balance of power. And for India, that move came in the form of a missile, not just any missile, a missile that didn't just change defense equations. It changed how the world looked at India. It was a strategic line in the sand. A silent sentinel standing tall, not shouting, not boasting, just being there ready, capable, and resolute. That's the power of deterrence. That's the brilliance of India's smartest defense move. You take a look at the times leading up to that moment. The region was volatile. Nuclear neighbors, shifting alliances, uncertain partnerships. India was often treated like a cautionary tale, potentially powerful, but not quite there. A country with dreams, but perhaps not the muscle to back them. And then, it happened. India developed and demonstrated a missile capability so precise, so advanced, and so self-reliant that it didn't need to beg for recognition anymore. It demanded it, without saying a word. The message was clear. This missile was not just a piece of hardware. It was a signal to the world. India was no longer a passive actor on the stage of global power. It was now a nation with the capability to strike, to protect, and to stand. That missile didn't scream aggression. It radiated assurance. It told the world, we don't want to fight, but we won't run from one either. Think about that. In a region where geopolitical tensions can spike at any moment, where borders are tested and allegiances shift like sand, India chose restraint wrapped in readiness. And that restraint, that calm control, it came from the confidence of having the right weapon in the right hands. This missile was a game changer because it allowed India to act not out of fear, but from strength. The kind of strength that keeps peace by making the cost of conflict too high for anyone to consider. Now let's talk ripple effect. That one move wasn't just about security. It elevated India diplomatically. Nations began to treat India not just as a large country, but as a responsible power. Memberships at the global table became more than symbolic. They became strategic. Because once a country demonstrates it can handle immense power with discipline and clarity, the world listens. And the beauty of it all, India didn't become a superpower by invading anyone, or by, say, rattling, or by flexing endlessly on the world stage. It did it with a quiet revolution, a technological leap that made war unlikely, peace sustainable, and sovereignty non-negotiable. That's how one missile didn't just protect a nation, it defined it. And that's the story of how India's smartest defense move became the cornerstone of its superpower identity. Fire is primal. It can destroy, but it can also protect. And when India named its missile Agni, it wasn't just drawing from mythology or symbolism. It was stating a truth. Because Agni wasn't just a missile. It was intent. It was resilience. It was the fire of a nation that had waited too long to be taken seriously on the global stage. And in that fire, India didn't just find strength. It found purpose. You see, people often mistake missiles for threats. For India, Agni wasn't a threat. It was a message that said, we are done depending. We are done watching. We are here to lead. That moment, the birth of the Agni series, was more than a defense program. It was a shift in mindset. It was India saying to the world, we are not just going to play catch-up anymore. We are going to create technology, not borrow it. We are going to build our own shields, not rent them. This wasn't just about range or payload or targeting systems. It was about belief. Until Agni, India's defense identity had often been reactive. This missile turned it proactive. It gave India the power to define its defense narrative on its own terms. No more waiting for permission. No more depending on external validation. Agni was a symbol of strategic independence. Fire with direction, fire with vision, and the impact. It wasn't limited to defense labs or military circles. It reached the common man, the global observer, the skeptical superpower. Because now India wasn't just saying it wanted peace. It was showing it could hold peace in place. It was showing that peace, real peace, is not the absence of war, but the presence of strength. That's what Agni delivered. Strength wrapped in silence, backed by intention. Fast, forward to flashpoints like Kargil, or tense standoffs at the border. That missile, parked in silos, tracked but never launched, was present in every decision, every negotiation, every moment when things could have gone sideways. It didn't have to fly to make its mark. Its presence was enough. Because deterrence isn't about action, it's about anticipation. It's about making sure your enemy knows one wrong step and there will be consequences. And the best part, that missile allowed India to hold the line without ever crossing it. During the Kargil War, what India showed was not just bravery on the front lines, but maturity in restraint. Knowing you can act, but choosing to wait. That's the discipline of a superpower. That's the difference between noise and power. And you better believe every rival, every observer, every critic felt that difference when Agni stood quietly in the background. And what about Doklam? A flashpoint that could have triggered wider tensions. But there again, India didn't need to shout. It had already spoken years before through its missile program. That capability gave India a voice in negotiations that didn't need to beg. It simply reminded the world we're not afraid of the fire because we've mastered it. So understand this. Agni wasn't about destruction. It was about dignity. It was about protecting 1 billion voices, 1 million soldiers, and one nation's right to walk tall. That missile didn't make India dangerous. It made India respected. It made India unignorable. And in the game of global power, that is the smartest move you can make. Power is not just about what you hold in your hands. It's about what you no longer have to ask for. That's what strategic autonomy really means. It's not loud. It's not decorated with medals or speeches. It's silent, steady, and deep. And India's smartest defense move, building that one missile, wasn't about proving something to the world. It was about removing the need to prove anything at all. There was a time when India had to rely on foreign suppliers for critical defense technology. Missiles, radars, guidance systems, all tied to international politics. One deal could be stalled, one sanction could derail an entire defense program. That dependence meant vulnerability, not just on the battlefield, but at the negotiating table. And when your national security is subject to someone else's approval, you're not free, you're functioning on a leash. That's what changed with the development of India's indigenous missile capability. It wasn't just about the missile, it was about the mindset. India stopped asking and started building. The Agni program and others like it were born out of a necessity, but what they gave India was freedom. Strategic autonomy, the ability to chart its own defense path without waiting for a green light from across the ocean. And let's be clear, this wasn't an overnight shift. It took decades of scientific grit, policy courage, and geopolitical resilience. But once that missile stood tall on Indian soil, powered by Indian science and aimed with Indian vision, something fundamental shifted. India no longer had to whisper in global corridors. It could walk through them upright. You see, when you can defend yourself on your own terms, your entire foreign policy becomes stronger. You're not maneuvering from a place of need. You're operating from a place of strength. That's what the missile brought. It turned India into a country that others now had to factor in, not just because of economic clout or population, but because it had an independent deterrent, a line no one could cross without consequence, and no one else had to draw it for us. That independence also means resilience. Sanctions, India worked around them. Technology embargoes, we built our own. That's how you know a nation has grown. Not when it avoids pressure, but when it thrives under it. And what's remarkable is that in building this strategic independence, India never compromised its values. No first use, defensive posture, moral clarity in a world of blurred lines. That's power with principles. It also reshaped how other countries engage with India. Now, deals are made with respect, not just interest. Collaborations happen because they're mutually beneficial, not because India has no better option. And in the world of diplomacy, nothing is more valuable than the ability to say no when it matters. That ability to choose, to resist, to redirect. That's what strategic autonomy gave India. So yes, one missile might sound small in the grand scheme of global defense. But for India, it was the key that unlocked a future where we don't just participate, we lead, where we're not just included, we're indispensable. Because when you're strong on your own terms, no one else gets to define your future for you. And that, right there, is the smartest move a nation can make. Power isn't always seen on a battlefield. Sometimes it's sitting quietly in a silo, never fired, never launched, but speaking louder than any bullet ever could. That's the kind of power India gained with its smartest defense move, the missile that didn't just sit behind policy, but silently backed every critical decision. It wasn't just metal and circuitry, it was presence. It was pressure, and it was peace maintained not by fear, but by certainty. Think about the Kargil conflict. Soldiers were bleeding in the mountains, fighting for every inch of their land. The nation watched with pride and fear. But behind the scenes, there was something else holding the line. Not on the front, but in the minds of those watching from across borders. A missile, India's homegrown response to vulnerability, stood ready. And that changed everything, because when your adversary knows you can respond not with desperation, but with precision, they start measuring their actions differently. The very existence of that missile capability was a force multiplier without a single launch. That's the essence of deterrence. It's not about starting a war. It's about ending the thought of one before it begins. The enemy doesn't cross the line, not because they're afraid of a fight, but because they know they can't afford what comes next. That's what India achieved, a shield so strong it didn't need to shine, it just needed to be. Now move to Doklam. Another flashpoint, another test of resolve. The terrain was different, the actors more complex, but the underlying truth remained. India's restraint came from capability, the ability to stay calm in the face of provocation, because the nation wasn't reacting out of panic. It was standing firm out of strength. That's the kind of discipline only real power brings. The missile was never moved into view. It didn't have to be. Its presence was already calculated in the minds of the opposition. That's the power of silent dominance. You see, in international relations, there are two kinds of respect. One that is requested, and one that is assumed. India, for decades, had to keep requesting a seat at the table. But with the successful development and quiet deployment of its missile deterrent, that conversation changed. Respect was no longer a favor, it was a fact. Because countries that can defend their own skies, protect their borders, and hold the line without escalating, those are not just developing nations. Those are global players. This missile didn't just give India a shield. It gave India a voice, not a loud, aggressive one, but a calm, steady voice that said, "We're prepared, and we're not afraid." That voice echoed in every diplomatic exchange, in every strategic dialogue, in every foreign policy paper. India was no longer seen as the country that might rise. It had arrived, and the brilliance of it all lies in the restraint. Because true superpowers don't flaunt their weapons, they master them. And India showed the world exactly that. Whether in the mountains of Kargil or the standoff at Doklam, India's strength didn't come from what it said, it came from what it didn't have to say, and that's a lesson the world learned, quietly, clearly, and permanently. That's how one missile held the peace, without ever leaving the ground. Peace is not a promise, it's a calculation. And when the stakes are high, when borders are tense, when history is complex and the neighborhood is unpredictable, peace doesn't happen by chance. It's created, it's engineered, and sometimes it's enforced, not by starting a war, but by making one unthinkable. That's what India did. With one missile, India didn't just build a weapon. It built a wall of deterrence that turned the science of fear into the architecture of stability. For decades, India preached nonviolence. It spoke of diplomacy, patience, principles. But the world doesn't always listen to idealism unless it's backed by capability. And that's where the brilliance of this defense move comes in. It wasn't a betrayal of peace, it was the foundation of it. Because in the real world, peace is protected by power, and power today isn't just about soldiers or ships. It's about strategic reach, technological precision. A credible threat that doesn't need to be used to be effective. That's what India's missile did. It made war less likely, not more. This wasn't about arms races. It wasn't about domination. It was about establishing a line that said, we are not here to attack. But if you cross into our sovereignty, we will respond, and we will do it decisively. That clarity removed ambiguity, and ambiguity is what often leads to war. Before this missile, India was seen as strong, but possibly hesitant. After it, India was seen as balanced, restrained, but unshakable. And let's not forget the strategic message it sent beyond the subcontinent. It told the world, India is not just a regional actor anymore. It has the technological backbone, the political maturity, and the strategic clarity to play on the global chessboard. The missile wasn't just about defense. It was about status. It placed India in a select group of nations who are capable of long-range precision strike, and more importantly, capable of the discipline to hold it in check. That's what makes deterrence powerful. Not just the ability to act, but the wisdom to wait. The missile sits in its silo, not as a weapon of aggression, but as a guardian of peace. It speaks a language the world understands. It says, we will not be bullied, we will not be overlooked, and we will never be cornered. That's not about arrogance, that's about assurance, a nation that has something to protect, and the strength to protect it well. Think of how that reshaped India's foreign policy environment. When a nation carries credible deterrence, its voice in global forums deepens. Its alliances become more equal, its enemies become more cautious. Peace is easier to pursue when others know you are capable of ending conflict swiftly, if forced. It brings seriousness to every negotiation, every dialogue, every warning. That's how India, with one bold move, didn't just strengthen itself militarily. It elevated itself diplomatically. Because war is chaos. It's uncertainty. But deterrence, that's order. That's balance. That's the science of peace in action. And the real genius of India's move was understanding that the smartest way to avoid conflict is to be utterly prepared for one. That's how one missile, backed by quiet resolve, didn't push India toward violence. It pulled the region away from it. There comes a moment in every nation's journey when it stops being seen as a follower and starts being recognized as a force. For India, that moment didn't come with a grand announcement or a global treaty. It came with a missile, one missile, not fired, not paraded with arrogance, but developed with vision. It wasn't about revenge or rivalry. It was about recognition. Because from the day that missile stood ready, India was no longer waiting to be invited to the world stage. It was already seated, calm, capable, and undeniable. Before that move, India had always been viewed as almost there. A rising power, a potential leader, words that sound encouraging, but carry an undercurrent of doubt. But when you build something that only a handful of nations can, when you do it with your own scientists, your own technology, your own purpose, there's no almost anymore. There's only presence. And India's presence became something the world had to acknowledge, not just because of its size, but because of its strength. You see, the missile wasn't just about range and payload. It was about reach. Global reach, the kind of capability that says we're no longer confined to our region. We can defend our interests, we can support our allies, and we can deter any threat anywhere. That level of reach transforms perception. Suddenly, India wasn't just one of many developing countries. It was a strategic player, capable of shaping outcomes far beyond its borders. That shift had ripple effects. Nations that once dealt with India through the lens of aid and cooperation started talking about joint ventures, partnerships, strategic alignments. Defense dialogues became two-way streets. Military exercises became peer-level operations. And behind all of that was the quiet understanding. India had crossed a threshold, not just of technology, but of influence. It wasn't just foreign powers that changed their tone. The Indian people did too. There was a new sense of belief, a confidence that their country could hold its own, not just economically, but militarily and diplomatically. That belief matters, because when a nation believes in itself, it walks taller. It negotiates harder. It dreams bigger. That one missile became more than a weapon. It became a symbol of national will. And in the arena of global politics, symbols are powerful. Just like the space race or the nuclear club, joining the elite few with credible missile capabilities placed India in a new category. It became part of the conversation that decides what tomorrow looks like. And it did that not by copying others, but by charting its own course, by building with intent, by innovating under pressure, by holding to principle while pursuing power. Now, when international summits take place, when defense pacts are signed, when strategies are drawn up in think tanks and war rooms, India is not just considered, it's calculated in, not as a variable, but as a constant. That's not something you're given. That's something you earn, and India earned it step by step, launch by launch, decision by decision. That's what makes this one missile more than a defense milestone. It was a declaration that India would no longer be defined by others, that it was no longer waiting on the world. It was helping shape it, quietly, deliberately, and with fire in its soul.